All right, SEC football fans, it's Super Bowl Sunday, so a peek inside the SEC decided to come a little early. That way we weren't competing with Super Bowl. You got to get your SEC fix first, and then you head on to your Super Bowl parties. Allie Peak, TJ Pittinger. All right, TJ, who are you rooting for tonight?
Yeah, probably KC.
Yeah.
I remember the Bucks Eagles rivalry.
Oh my gosh, that's exactly why I'm rooting
Yeah,
for Kansas City too.
as many
Brad
people
and my
hate.
girls want to root for Taylor Swift's boyfriend, but
Okay, I can't lie. I kind of like the Taylor Swift angle too. Like I like
my
seeing her
littles
happy.
love it.
Yeah, we could get a good album though if they lose. Like they win too much with
That's
her
true.
there. I think they're like 9-0 in the playoffs, and like
Yeah.
16-19 overall when she's in attendance. Maybe we get a good album if they lose and there was some
Mhm.
depression in there. But yeah, I like seeing her happy too. As many people may hate that. I don't hate the Chiefs like most people do. I got a hot. Okay, so I read this on Twitter. It's not even my take. People hate greatness now. Like they hate anyone that's great. But
Yeah.
it didn't. I think that's social media. It didn't always used to be that way.
Yeah, that's true. Because we
Like
loved Michael Jordan and all those Bulls
ex-
dynasty. The Yankees. I actually was sitting upstairs
exactly.
doing my makeup before this, and my dad had sent me this clip on Instagram, just a baseball clip, and it just had kind of made me think about in October growing up, like laying on the floor watching all of those Yankees teams, and I was
Yep.
thinking about like when Daryl Strawberry would come up to bat. I can remember being little and thinking like, "Oh, his last name's Strawberry," but like all those Yankees teams, and you're right, like we used to think the dynasties were awesome, right? We
Yep.
strove, you were want your team to strive to be that, right? And now we do hate them. And that's, I mean, I don't
People,
hate them, but people do hate them.
yeah, people hate LeBron because of social media. But they didn't have like George, like LeBron is actually,
Don't
and
say it.
yeah, like he's actually a good person,
Oh,
like
I know
not
you're gonna
involved in like a
we're gonna have
not it like he's not involved in a bunch of controversy. Like if they knew what Michael,
all the way through. Didn't he
yeah,
date
if
the
they
people? Like
if
this
they
was
knew the things that Michael was doing,
right.
the
Right.
gambling and the drink, like
Uh-huh.
people would like you think people hate LeBron now, just switch their eras. Like
Right.
just switch Mike LeBron to the 90s when we didn't have constant media coverage and switch
Oh yeah,
Jordan to now, they would hate Jordan. Like they would
for sure.
and people say it all the time, "Oh, I just want to see something new." It was the
Right.
Bulls every year and winning every single year. And people, yeah, it's why they hate LeBron. It's why they hate the Chiefs. It's why they hated
Right.
Brady. It's why they hate Serena Williams. Like, but they didn't do that back in the day. And so, I mean, so anyway, all that said, I kind of still like the Chiefs. I like Mahomes. I mean, now Mahomes' family is annoying. I like Kelsey. I like Andy Reid. So
I don't mind any of the rest of his family.
I, yeah, I like the Chiefs. So yeah, anyone but the Eagles at this point is great with me.
Yeah, I feel like that's Tampa. Like it was either the Redskins or the Eagles that we like were battling with every single time. And that's probably why I favor KC. But I do like greatness. I am not one of those people who wanted to see Alabama fall. Like I loved the Saban dynasty. I think it's so cool when you can dominate an era. So I don't know. I maybe that's my issue. But my teeny
We're
bopper is
built different.
Taylor Swift's boyfriend. Actually, Emerson came into the bathroom and she was like, when I was doing my hair, she was like, "Hey, where are we going tonight?" I'm like, "We're going to a Super Bowl party." And she was like, "Who's playing?" And I said, "The Eagles and the Chiefs." And she goes, "Well, what team do we want to win?" I was like, "You can want whatever team you want, whatever team you want to win. It doesn't matter." And she goes, "Okay, well, what color are they?" And I was like, "Well, the Chiefs are red and yellow, and the Eagles are green." And I was like, "Taylor Swift's boyfriend does play for the Chiefs." And she goes, "Oh, we're cheering for the Chiefs." And then
Yeah.
she left the room. She's 5. That was her. Oh, we're rooting for
Yeah.
the Chiefs.
That's certainly why Kara and Elena would rather the Chiefs win too. So I'm not mad at the Taylor Swift stuff.
No. All right, so let's talk a little bit about. So Steve Spurrier had some interesting quotes this week, and you know, essentially what he said is that Georgia fans need to be a little bit more appreciative of Kirby Smart. And his exact quote, he essentially said that winning an SEC championship is the second hardest thing there is to do in college football. So the assumption there obviously is that the first hardest thing to do is to win a national championship, but that the second hardest thing to do is to win a Southeastern Conference title. And he actually even went on to say he felt like Kirby Smart had a better season than everyone but Ryan Day. And it's kind of hard to argue with his logic, but I ask you, TJ, in the playoff era, does a conference championship mean as much? I don't think he's wrong in saying it's the second hardest thing to do to win the SEC. I think that's accurate. But does it carry the same weight now that we have 84 bajillion teams in the playoffs?
Yeah, yes and no. Like it. No, not. I don't think there's a great answer. I would agree that it's probably the second hardest thing to do. Although I guess the bigger question is like the gap between 1 and 2 is so large, right? Like winning the Big Ten is still incredibly hard. Like it's not like it's the gap between 1 and 2 is wider than what would you say the third hardest thing to do is winning the Big Ten, right? So like the gap between 1 and 2 is much wider to me than the gap between 2 and 3. What I think makes it hard, what makes the
I
SEC
don't agree with that. I don't know that I agree with that, but go on.
I mean, that's fine.
I don't think
Look at the team that won the look at
winning the Big 12, Big 10 are really in the same sphere still. I think that the Big 10 is top heavy. I think they have probably
it's still really hard to win it though.
Really, I mean,
for those top teams,
it's not that hard to win it for those top
how
teams.
hard? How many SEC teams legitimately could have won the SEC this year?
A lot.
3 or 4? No.
I mean,
like who were the teams that really could like in the SEC? Who could have gotten to Atlanta and actually won that game? Georgia and Texas.
Georgia and Texas. It depends on who your opponent is. Ole Miss, Tennessee.
I don't think Tennessee.
Alabama.
I don't think Tennessee could have won the SEC championship. I think they had a really favorable schedule that got them to 10 wins. It
totally depends on how your schedule is set up, whether or not you
right.
even.
That's why I don't. That's why Tennessee got blown out by Georgia. I don't think they could have won that championship.
I just think it is a battle every single week. So surviving that battle and getting there is more difficult than surviving the Big Ten schedule and getting there.
I think I think I'd agree with that.
But that's
that's why I think winning the national championship is much harder. Like I think that gap is much harder because to win 4 games in the playoffs is hard to me. Like way harder.
It's a feat, but it is.
And
but
so
I think the gap to the Big Ten is probably. I think winning a national championship is the hardest thing. I think the gap between winning the national championship and an SEC is about as big as the gap between winning the SEC and winning the Big Ten.
I'd probably have it a little tougher because I mean, you have to make it. The other thing about the SEC too is the so much of getting to a conference championship now in the SEC is luck. Like there's a lot of luck involved. Because of the fact
though. That's not the more teams you add to a conference, the more you're relying on the luck of scheduling.
And the luck of just conference tiebreakers. There was a scenario with like 2 weeks to go where we could have had like 6 SEC teams with 2 losses, which just is lucky at that point if you get in, right? Like you're relying on what other teams have done to help your conference standings and things like that. Like, so some of it's luck too, with tiebreakers and stuff. So the bigger question to me is not necessarily how hard it is to win. It's like how relevant it is going to be going forward. And I think that in the Big Ten and the SEC specifically, I think there's a lot of pride in winning that conference.
For sure, winning your conference. Yeah.
And I think that's going to subside.
Yeah.
I think that is going to drop as conference realignment that may be on pause as that continues to change. Like when North Carolina eventually gets added or Virginia gets added or Clemson gets added or whatever.
The SEC doesn't have any interest in expanding right now. That's
not what I just said. I just said it was on pause.
No, I know.
They will expand in the next 5 or 6 years. Like when whether we go to super conferences, whatever we do.
I know you want that as an SEC or an ACC fan that wants out of that conference as a Florida State fan, but I don't know that I agree with that.
Okay, well then we can revisit the conversation in 5 years. That's not really what's important to me. As more teams are added to conferences, and as we get closer to super leagues or whatever, like as we get closer to the NFLization of college football, I do think the importance of winning the SEC is going to subside.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it becomes unimportant. I'm just telling you the importance of winning that is going to go down. You've got literal SEC coaches of some of the teams that you just mentioned could have possibly won this thing in Ole Miss. Like Ole Miss, we would say is our third most likely team to have won it this year, them or Tennessee. You've got their coach coming out and saying, I don't even know that we want to play in this thing. Right. And so when coaches are starting to say that, I think that signals and I think that other coaches probably think it, just don't want to say it out loud because Lane's willing to say more than most people.
Out loud, yeah.
I think that when coaches start to have that mindset of, I don't even know if we want to play in this thing,
Yeah.
because as nice as it is to win an SEC championship, you've got the problem that Georgia has right now.
Yeah.
Who really cares?
Yeah.
Like, Georgia fans are not beating their chest. Now, I will say, if a South Carolina could have gotten in, if a Florida could have gotten in over because of their last few years, if an Ole Miss could have won it for the first time, yes, it would have meant something. But
Yeah.
to Georgia and Texas, like, their fans don't even care. And so you've got coaches that
Well,
care less.
Texas fans just care because they want to say they were able to come into a new conference and win. But
I don't, but I don't think that, I think going forward, the importance of winning. I mean, do you think Oregon fans care about winning the Big Ten right now? Georgia fans don't care about winning the SEC. Oregon fans don't care about winning that. Arizona State, I'm sure they're happy. Clemson fans don't care about winning the ACC this year. They don't care at all. They know they backdoored into it. They know that they had 4 losses overall. They don't care at all about what. And so I do think that the importance, I'm not saying it goes away completely. I think that players want to win a national championship so much more than they want to win a conference. Coaches
yeah.
are now coming out and saying they don't care. And fans of winning teams, again, if a Missouri could have snuck in, if an A&M could have snuck in, a Florida, teams that haven't had a lot of success here recently, yes, it would have meant a lot. They could have, but the teams that are at the top, the Ohio States and the Michigans and the Penn States and the Oregons and the Georgias and Bamas, another SEC championship is great. You're happy about it for that week, and then you immediately forget about it and you think, all right, let's go try and win this whole thing.
Yeah,
If
I don't know. I don't know that I agree. And even if I see your point, it makes me very sad because I don't think, first of all, I don't think conference championships are going away because I think they're too big of a moneymaker for ESPN. And so I think if we're playing them, they should absolutely mean something. I'm old school SEC. I think it matters almost as much as winning a national title. But I mean, I get your point.
I'm not saying they don't mean anything ever.
I know.
I just think their importance is dying.
Yeah.
I also think, okay, so is this a hot take? This might be a hot take. I don't know that I don't think a championship game, and this is obviously a very non-American take, right? So maybe people will just think I'm a communist for saying this. I almost think what you do in the regular season is more impressive to me than what you do in a one-off game. Like,
That's
I've
the
always, hold
of
on. Slow down. At least let me make the point before you argue it. At least let me make the point before you argue it. In basketball, I've always thought that the regular season SEC champion or the ACC champion of the regular season was more impressive than
tournament.
a team that got hot in the tournament. And in a one-off football game, there's a little less variance, right? You may not just have a cold shooting night. Usually the better team is going to win in most games. But if in those years that you think about the years that Missouri made the championship, just because the East was terrible,
Yeah.
and Alabama was going, or the one year Auburn played Missouri, and Auburn and Alabama were just so much better teams than Missouri and had less losses going into it. They weren't like 2 evenly matched teams. I do think removing divisions helps this a little bit. But I have always thought that what you've done over the course of 8 or 9 weeks in the Big Ten is more impressive than a team who just has a fluky win or gets lucky breaks or plays a team without their starting quarterback. And so I would actually be in favor of, I don't know if this will ever happen. This was proposed by one conference commissioner. I would be in favor of the regular season champion for conferences going to the playoff. Like, the team that was the best
That's how
throughout.
the Pac-10 used to decide it. They didn't used to have a conference champion.
The ACC didn't used to have conference champion. I mean, the SEC did, way back in the day didn't have them either. Like, if you go back far enough, the SEC didn't either. I think we added conference championship games because of, again, the revenue side of it. But to me, what you've done over 9 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, to me, is more important than 60
But
minutes.
I think that you had me. I agreed with you until the very end. So I think what you are describing is why college football is unique and why we love this sport and we feel differently about it than almost anything else, is that the regular season does matter the most and should matter the most, which is what everyone has argued about for why we shouldn't expand the playoffs and that it potentially devalues that regular season. I just think, and things have changed because when the SEC added Oklahoma and Texas, but in general, your payoff was the conference championship for your season of play, and the whole season did matter. And I mean, it's theoretical at this point whether or not we get down to those tiebreakers and stuff. That is a one-off, essentially. In general, it's the most dominant two teams that get there. Do we have
since we've removed divisions? I will say,
no,
because before
prior to that,
I'm sorry,
too, there's one-offs, yes, but prior to that, the regular season mattered because in your division you played each other. So
well, no, I disagree. No, I disagree there. I think it's better now than it was because again, remember how many years in a row we just sent the East to be sacrificial lambs to the West? Like the East and the West were
together already. So they had already, every single team in the West had already played each other.
Right. My point is that I thought my point is that the best 2 or 3 teams were in the West. And so if we were going
that high, I think there's a lot of years where Alabama and LSU both could have made the argument to be in the SEC championship.
Correct. Yes.
But outside of those two, there was very rarely a scenario where there was 3. Can't think of a single time.
Well, we don't put 3 teams in one game. We only put 2.
But what I'm saying is, you're saying the best 3 or 4 teams were in the West, and we sent the sacrificial lamb. No, it was possible that there were the best 2 teams were in the West. But it is not ever a scenario where Georgia or Florida or Tennessee wasn't at least the 3rd best team in the SEC. That is
probably 2013. I mean, 13 would have been when Missouri went. I mean, you literally just disproved it by saying that Georgia, Tennessee, and when Missouri went in 2013, come on, Auburn, LSU, and Bama were better.
I don't know. I don't agree. I think Bama and LSU consistently were at the top of this conference. And listen, we got them in a national championship, even if we didn't get them in the conference championship that year. That happened, right? So it still worked itself out. But I disagree. I personally think, and as the actual SEC person here, I think
you have to fight this battle, yeah. Even if it doesn't make sense.
2 divisions. I think, unfortunately, we have too many teams in the conference, which is what makes you rely too much on schedule. I liked it a lot better when you played everybody in your side of the division. It was decided on the field.
No, the fact that you said Alabama and LSU, there were years where they were the best 2 teams, and we weren't getting that in SEC championship.
And we got it in the national championship.
Only once. One time.
It wasn't always the case. It's not like it was regularly they were the 2 best, and then there was 3 or 4.
I disagree with that. It did happen regularly. The 2 years that Missouri went, we could have had no divisions that year. The 2 years Florida went under McElwain, we could have had no divisions that year, right? Like there were certainly several years where it worked out,
not the rule.
where it didn't happen. I think eliminating divisions was smart. I think that was a good move.
I think there's too many. The only way that I could agree with it is if everybody played each other, or at the very least, we were back down to 12 SEC teams. We have too many teams to eliminate the divisions, in my opinion. But
yeah, I don't know.
We're not going to agree to this, so I think we should move on.
I would always rather see the best 2 teams and not the fact that we might have unbalanced divisions. I would always rather see the best 2 teams in the conference. I don't think that's a hot take.
So the best teams should always make the championships regardless of schedule, is what you're saying.
The teams with the best, like the way that we have it set up, yes. The best 2 teams based on an SEC schedule should make the conference championship.
But you're saying, but head-to-head doesn't matter in what you're saying because they had played each other in those scenarios when everybody in the division played each other.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes from
this FSU guy who was saying you play the schedule you're dealt, and we should have been there, but wasn't one of them.
Sometimes the schedules are unbalanced, but I certainly would take the teams that won. I mean, I'm not sure what your point is. You think that even if one division is weaker, that team should go because they played all the other weaker teams too?
I'm just saying,
Missouri was right to go those years. Because they played a bunch of weak SEC teams?
They didn't play a bunch of weak SEC teams. They played everybody in the East, and they played West teams as well. It's not like it's.
But if everybody in the East is bad one year, then that team deserves to go, not just the second best team.
How do you determine what is bad? If you're saying conference,
Florida went 4-8, Georgia went 6-6.
LSU didn't have a better record than Missouri that year, did they? Missouri. What was Missouri's record?
9-3, 10-2.
Which was it?
I don't have Missouri.
Okay. Well, I'm just saying it's they played the schedule they were dealt. They played by the rules. They got to the championship. I thought those were things you like.
Missouri, LSU won 10 games, and Missouri in 2013 won 10 games as well.
Okay, so
in the East.
So you're saying the eye test is what should matter in that situation. FSU doesn't normally like the eye test.
This is an SEC thing. The FSU jabs are great, but I don't know what I'm telling you is that I like the division gone.
Or the same record as LSU, and they played the schedule they were made, and the rules put them there. But then your argument should be LSU instead.
I just don't understand the argument for not just putting the teams with the.
I like the tradition. I like I personally think it was set up better when there were divisions within the conference. I think it
was definitely easier for Florida. It was easier for Florida to make it when there were divisions, for sure.
I mean, I don't know that I think that's. Florida's schedule is so difficult this past year that division, not division, whatever else, it would have been terrible. We still kept all of our traditional East people for the most part. We don't play South Carolina,
or Vandy,
but we still play Georgia and we still play Tennessee, which are the only teams in general that were keeping us out of there for the most part. South Carolina did keep us out,
except for those 2 years that Missouri did. Those 2 years Missouri did too. Count too.
Missouri kept us out of it. I doubt that Missouri was the deal breaker for us if we were losing to Missouri that year.
13 and 14, right?
Yeah, but did that keep us out?
Certainly didn't get in.
11-1. No, but Florida was garbage. Is my point.
Right.
It wasn't that loss that kept us in. But all right, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about. You had sent me this article that I found very interesting. With Joe Burrow essentially came out and said high school kids need to strike while the iron is hot, go to the school that offers the most money. That's kind of the era we're in NIL. Now, this was a guy who started at Ohio State, obviously ended his career at LSU, got incredibly developed, right? Has a great NFL career. Did you find that take interesting? Do you think that just is where we are right now with college football? Should these high school kids just chase the bag, or should they, I don't know, take development into account, take system into account? Where are we on that?
I think it's an interesting comment from a guy who was obviously developed really, really well.
Yes.
To just go all money. But here's what I will say. Guys can, like, if you're an SEC level caliber player or you're an upper tier Big Ten caliber player, I don't know that the development is so much different amongst common programs.
Okay.
Like, I don't know that the development at Georgia is so much further ahead of Alabama or LSU or programs like that. Do I think it's ahead slightly?
Now, is the development there better than your development at, I don't know, NC State? I would say probably yes.
Correct. But NC State's not offering the same kind of bag that a Georgia, LSU, or whatever.
But the top tier have.
Correct. And I think the next tier is probably pretty similar. And I think the next tier is probably pretty similar, right? Probably. Like, your development at Miami and Florida State are about the same. Your development at Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan are about the same. Now, more players get drafted off of the teams that win more because of a couple of things. One, they play longer. They play more games. They put more film on tape, right? Like, they usually recruit slightly better too. And so, yeah, I think I kind of agree with Burrow. Like, I think I'm kind of on the same page. Like, if your choices are the top 5 SEC programs, right? Texas, LSU, Georgia, and Bama, right? If those are our 5 or our top kind of 4 programs in the SEC right now. Right. If the bag is different at one of them, like, take the bigger bag, because none of those programs are developing you so much better for the NFL than the rest of them. And if your offer is Notre Dame, Ohio State, or Michigan, take the most money, because they all put players in the league at about the same rate. And so now, if you're at that next tier, if you're at the kind of the Ole Miss, Auburn, A&M level, same thing, right? Take where the bigger bag is, because all 3 of those programs are going to develop you at about the same rate, right? And so could there be slight variance?
What if you have 3 or 4 second tier offers and 1 or 2 top tier offers, and the money is bigger in your second tier offer because Georgia, truly Georgia and some of these programs know that they develop you and pay a little bit less than schools that we would consider maybe the second tier, because the school at the second tier is struggling to attract that talent, so they are willing to pay more.
So let's say like a Georgia versus Auburn, where you've
Okay.
got probably a better shot to go to the league at Georgia. I don't know. So then it becomes, are you playing right away at Georgia? Would you rather put 3 years of film on tape at Auburn
Right.
or 2 at Georgia, right? And maybe transfer out. So I don't know. I think every case is a little bit different, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'd probably lean toward going where also making the next level is not a guarantee for many guys, right?
Sure. And
And
that is
so
definitely, if you're a
if
guy that is not projected to be an NFL player, you're just going to be a nice college player. I totally understand the
take the
concept
bag.
of taking
And
it back. I think it matters. I think for a 5-star, development matters more, and getting on the field quickly and things like that matter more than the bag, because in theory, you're going to be making that NFL money as long as you continue to develop in the way that you should.
the other thing is too, I think coaches deserve a ton of like credit and blame for development, but ultimately, like it didn't matter where Jeremiah Smith went to college. Like he's going and playing for the best. But if Jeremiah Smith would have gone to Alabama, if he would have gone
He's
to
amazing.
Miami, if he'd have gone to Florida, he was still going to be the number 1 wide receiver drafted because he's that kind of player, right?
Sure.
And
But
same thing, like
that's an
if
outlier,
Arch Manning,
though.
if Arch Manning had somehow ended up at Clemson, he was still going to be drafted as one of the top 3 quarterbacks. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I also think that do we maybe put a little bit of too much stock into the actual development? Like, I think it matters, but I also think that the player being elite going into college
Right. I
typically
think his
comes out
advice,
of college elite too.
yes, but I think the development matters for the mass majority of players who aren't elite. If we're going to consider elite those 5-star guys each year, there is, a few dozen 5-stars in college football at any given time, right? Like, let's say they stick around
32, yeah.
3 years. So you're talking about less than 70 spread out over all of college football. Each team has a handful, except for the teams at the top who maybe have 2 handfuls. So I don't know. It's for everybody else. Development matters for everybody else. Those guys statistically are going to be fine wherever they go. But your 3 and 4-star guys, where you choose to go so that you get developed, does very much matter, because that's the difference between you playing in the league or not.
Yeah, it does, but within the context of taking a bigger bag, like I don't think anybody's offering this 3-star a huge. So I don't think they are as relevant to the conversation. Your low 4 stars, your
But I
high
could
3 stars.
argue that they're the one that the bag matters more for too. Like that, they're in a hard situation because development matters for them, but they also have that thing where it's like, I may not
Small
make it.
window.
So do I take
Yeah.
the money now because it's security for me later, but it might actually hurt my development and long-term prospects. Like that is more of the tricky situation. These 5-star guys freaking take the bag, and then you're making a bag later too.
Yeah, and I will say there's probably, like if you made a Venn diagram, there's a pretty good Venn diagram of the teams that are developing the best and
sure.
paying the most,
Well, I'm
right?
sure-
So
yeah.
it's not. I don't think it's like an impossible decision that these guys have to make.
No.
Most of the time, it's lined up pretty well, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're paying me the most, they probably have pretty good like Northwestern ain't offering a guy $10 million to come play there, right? So you don't have to worry about like, oh man, I might not get developed as well. I mean, shoot, like, there are guys that are going to be first round draft picks that went to those mid-tier SEC programs that are not the Georgias and Alabamas, right? Like, and so, I do think that if they're offering you a pretty big bag, they probably have pretty good coaches. They're probably putting guys in the NFL at a pretty high rate too. So I don't think it's an impossible decision. So all that considered, like, yeah, I think you capitalize. I mean, break your leg in half and never play again, right? Like, I'd say you got to take the bag when you take the bag. And if money's comparable and it's like, man, $1 million to play at Georgia or, 900,000 to play at Florida, like, yeah, maybe, or, I'm sorry, back that up. $1 million to play at Florida and 900,000 to play at Georgia, and you're a kid from South Carolina that has no allegiance to either. Yeah, maybe you take the $100,000 discount to play where you think there's a little more stability. But I don't know, man. I think you ultimately just have to go where there's the money. If the NBA, if a player's a free agent and the Lakers offer him 10 million and the Warriors offer him 8 million, I mean, he's going to play for $10 million. Like that's just what.
But it's also the pros, and that's the problem that some of us traditionalists are like, this isn't the pros. We don't want it to be the pros, and but here we are. And I'm interested to see, do these things change any with the NCAA settlement with the House? I mean, April is when we should have some more clarity on this, but does this in any way level the playing field? Does it make it more like professional football? Does it cut out kind of some of these middlemen? Greg Skanke was on with Paul Feinbaum this week, and they were kind of talking about it, and I know you had some issues with some of the things he said in regards to collectives, which I believe essentially what he said is we have to fix this system. We have some of these collectives making deals and then they can't even pay it, and your point essentially is like, well, the collectives shouldn't be making deals that they can't keep their word on, right?
Yeah, I have a hard time feeling bad for collectives that are not able to fulfill on promises they made, right? I have a hard time shedding any tears.
And I don't shed any tears for the collectives, but I took it as he was saying like the player got screwed. That we have these third party people that are potentially out there negotiating deals, and college students don't know any better, so they sign them and they commit themselves to this school because of what was promised by a third party, and the third party's not following through. And now that kid is,
which is why there's an entire avenue of contracts law, and we need to see more. Like if a collective, and I don't care if it's Florida State's collective, I don't care if it's Florida, I don't care if it's Miami, Alabama, whatever. If a collective, if it is Florida State's collective that is making a promise of we're going to pay you X if you do Y, and they're not living up to that, I want to see more collectives in court. I don't feel bad. I am fully on board with seeing more lawsuits if that's what's happening, right? If Sankey's right and there are collectives that are making promises that they can't keep, I want to see them in court, right? We've already started to see that some, right? Florida had a situation. Florida State's got one in basketball. Good. Put them in court. If they're making promises they can't keep, sue them for everything they've got, right? Especially if it's in writing or it's written down somewhere or whatever. Like, sign your contracts and you need to pay up, right? Because, I am not here for the athlete getting screwed, but this unsustainable world that we live in right now that Sankey's talking about is here because, let's be honest, his coaches, the Big Ten coaches, ACC, Big 12 coach, are making massive promises, and if the collectives can't fulfill that, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the kids. I feel bad for the kids, but
I don't feel bad.
I don't feel bad for the schools or the programs or
I don't feel bad for any of the adults.
ESPN's writing the SEC $1 billion a year check. Share with the players, man. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, fulfill your promises.
I thought it was interesting. One of the things he said in that quote was that he talked about how he's hoping that once these rules go into place, that what he's saying is to essentially save college football, that we come up with something sustainable for college football. And then he hopes that the members abide by that. And I think essentially what he's saying is that he is expecting that these schools will stop coming up with workarounds for all these rules. And that to me just seems so pie in the sky. Like, of course, there is 0% chance that in this ultra competitive sport that people are going to stop trying to come up with a workaround to game the system. Like, that's not realistic at all.
Yeah, no, I know you've got connects at Florida. Like, I've spoken with people at Florida and asked about this whole cap and house settlement. And, if a collective is paying, that's going to be outside of the cap, obviously. And there is, and they're not the only ones. Like, I've actually spoken with somebody at Georgia too. There is no intention from major SEC programs, and then most programs in general that are competing at this level,
follow the
rules. There's no rule against paying outside of the cap, right? Like, now again, you go look at a school like, I don't know, like, no, they're paying a lot. Like is Houston right? In the Big 12 is Wake Forest. They're not even going to touch the cap. So it's
Right.
not as relevant for them. They're not paying $20 million a year right now in NIL across all sports anyway. So it's less relevant for them. But you're telling me that Ohio State's going to all of a sudden put their budget down to 18 million and that be for all sports? You're telling
Right.
me that Michigan's going to do that, Notre Dame's going to do that, Florida State, Miami? Like that ain't happening. And
No.
so it
What
is
this
very
is it just brought us back to the time of $10,000 handshakes, right? Like if we agreed that your payment as a student athlete is your room and board and tuition, and that's what it is across the board, and then we would have schools with cash handshakes, right? That went to players that happened under the table. If
But they
we
don't even
go
have to be under the table now. They can still just operate through the like legal contracts through collectives. Like the collectives aren't going anywhere. They're not going to ban them.
I mean, but let's say they do, right? I did hear some discussion about them saying, like, you will not spend a dollar outside of this money. And if that happens, you go right back to the cash handshakes. But my point was that the collectives are the proverbial handshakes, right? They're
Right.
the if this is where we hope you all stay, you've got this over here still going on. And
Yeah,
I think that's gonna change.
I think schools, just to be very frank, I think schools would like to get rid of collectives, just in large part, right? Some schools, I'm not going to lump every single school. I think schools would like to get rid of it, and they would like for it to just.
Because I think there is a little bit more parity, and it's more like, okay,
Uh,
offensive tackle and this, like
I don't think they. Yeah, that'd be great for us. I don't think the schools care about the parity. I think they just want all the money flowing through. Like the athletic directors want all the money flowing through them, and so they want. They don't want like Scott Strickland or Michael Alford or any of these ads. They don't want you giving money to your collective, right? Now they do in a competing sense, but they would much rather you just write all of those checks to Gator boosters or or Seminole boosters. They would rather that money flow through them. Let's be honest, right? And so they don't want to be competing with these collectives for money. They want money flowing for buildings and coaches and things that they can actually impact. Because let's be real, that's what their job is, not how well of a roster. And so if it's all level and it's all even, the parity is back from that, then great. And the money's coming to us, not this outside entity that's affiliated with us, but we're not touching any of that revenue. They want the revenue for themselves. And so I wonder how much I don't think they're doing it. Greg Sankey's point, I don't think he's, necessarily doing this out of the goodness of his heart. I think he knows that his presidents and his ADs and everybody else, they want the money back into the schools. They don't want it outside of the schools.
Right.
All right. On money specifically, SEC revenue payouts came out a little over $50 million a year, which is second to the Big Ten, right? I don't think the Big Ten has announced theirs yet, but their projected numbers are a little bit higher. With the parity that exists in the SEC right now, we talked about them adding teams and things, does it, I don't want to say concern you, but like just thoughts on if the SEC operates at a revenue gap behind the Big Ten, and then, some of the Big Ten money that we've seen thrown around by like Oregon and Ohio State. I sent you an NIL article that Oregon and Ohio State probably spend the most when it comes to NIL, like true NIL, like what's being spent. I wonder if that doesn't widen the gap some to send more talent up there, because in the SEC, it's spread so thin, I feel like. Now, the SEC will always have more talent. They will all, like from a total, you just got more teams bought in and invested in. Like you've even got like a South Carolina competing, and Missouri and Ole Miss, A&M and Texas, all these teams.
Like, what is the projected difference?
I think it's like 10 million, but over the next several years, it grows. Like it gets up to like 25.
Is, SEC teams didn't have a particularly great showing in the playoffs this year. That 10 million absolutely can change. 10 million is a drop in the bucket for college athletics in general. They're going to make that up in basketball. They're going to make more money than the Big Ten in basketball, hands down. They're going to make more money in baseball. They're probably going to be the only conference that makes money there.
My thought is, though, and the Big Ten also made more money in the playoffs by having more teams advance and move on.
Sure.
And then I also think
they can count on every single year. Like that's going to vary every single year.
But with the revenue difference, if it continues to climb and grow, which it's projected to, right? Like you can look at the year-over-year projections up through 2030 when everybody re-signs their deals and stuff, and we'll see what it looks like then. I just wonder, with the SEC having so many teams that compete and actually invest, you've got teams that are going 4-8, and Oklahoma's still throwing a ton of money at it.
Sure.
Whereas at the Big Ten level, they still split everything evenly, but the way that it gets invested back into it is very different, right? The way that an Ohio State and Oregon, it almost just feels like as much parity as there is in the SEC, that is going to very much continue. And the Big Ten is only going to get more of the top of the Big Ten is going to get more of an increase and more of a separation. It almost feels like to me, and this is just guessing out at the next 5 years, it almost feels like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon are kind of at a little bit higher level. And then you've got like the entire SEC, and then you've got like the bottom Big Ten. As far as like a revenue generation, money bringing in standpoint of, not just the TV deals, but the success that they may find in the playoffs too. And I think some of those, when you're looking at what teams spend in NIL, I think that you've also got those top level Big Ten teams spending more than most SEC teams too. Larger donor bases, more national brands that are investing more. So I just wonder how that plays out on the field. If for the next 5 years, if Ohio State makes the most money and recruits the best, and Michigan makes more money than most people and recruits better, and if Notre Dame does that, Oregon, obviously with Phil Knight, if that doesn't create somewhat of a separation, not that I'm not saying those 4 teams are going to dominate football for the next, so obviously Texas is spending a lot of money. Georgia's spending a lot of money. I do think though the gap does make it pretty interesting.
So I just looked up, and I don't agree with the premise. I understand the premise, and that's that the conference as a whole brought in a little bit more money. Last year in college athletics for the 2024 year, Ohio State brought in the most revenue overall. So their athletic program overall brought in more than everybody else. But second was Texas A&M. Third was Texas. Fourth is Michigan. Fifth is Georgia. Sixth is actually Nebraska. So more than Penn State, more than Oregon. 7 is Penn State. 8 is Tennessee. 9 is LSU. 10 is Alabama. 11 is Oklahoma. 12 is actually Wisconsin. So in terms of overall athletic revenue, it's not even actually the top teams in that conference translating to the top earners necessarily. Now, obviously, Ohio State overall, and they've got the national championship, so they're just
get up there too, yeah,
all over the place. I mean, Penn State's but when you think Wisconsin is generating more than Oregon is overall, I don't know. It's interesting, and then you've got Auburn, Florida, Kentucky, then Michigan State, then Florida State. Not that I just throw Florida State in there for you, but then Iowa, Arkansas is up there, South Carolina, then Washington, then Oregon.
Yeah. I think Notre Dame being a private, there's some private schools that are up there really high too. Like Notre Dame's up there, just not public.
Okay, well, yeah. I don't know where Notre Dame would fall.
This is public schools. Private schools are going to be really high in there too. And so there's a few that are in there. Like, isn't USC private as well?
They're private, and so
there's a few that are really private and up there high too. And Notre Dame's kind of like they're quasi Big Ten to me, right? Like they're just in that region and kind of in that strategy.
They don't benefit from the Big Ten money, which is part of this conversation.
They do. I mean, they get the ironically Notre Dame's payout is higher than everyone else's in the country's because they're
by themselves,
and they get a really large share of the ACCs too. So Notre Dame is actually in the best situation of
never joining a conference because it fully benefits them to stand alone. But
Notre Dame makes more than the Big Ten does right now.
I don't think the teams spending the most are necessarily the teams bringing in the most. If you're telling me Oregon's spending the most, Oregon isn't earning the most. So Phil Knight's just writing the most checks over there.
And so on our old model of the 4-team playoff, I think that will change a little bit. I think Oregon, like when we look at next year,
I would be interested to see when we do this next year what that looks like and how different it is.
And so I do think, again, the premise is not that they're just going to run college football. The premise is that like if the Michigans and Ohio States and Notre Dames that are already really high on that list don't start to separate, not only from the Big Ten where they already have, don't separate a little bit from the SEC too, because they also recruit incredibly well, right? Like Michigan just stole the #1 quarterback in the country from LSU. So I do think that exactly. Right. I think they've got the money to spend too. Yeah. So I don't know. A lot of those schools are just incredibly old and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Michigan, Ohio State, I would assume have larger endowments than like most SEC programs. I think that some of those Big Ten schools can really make a difference there. And I don't know. We saw it with Ohio State this year, and we'll see if Oregon can catch up or not.
They can't touch their endowment, so that doesn't even really matter if they have the largest endowment.
Oregon being on there too, also it includes their Pac-12 payout. I think as they start to make money in the Big Ten, we'll see a little bit of a difference there. So Oregon being low doesn't worry me as much.
Yeah, I mean those numbers will definitely change. That'll be interesting to see. Yeah,
I'm not necessarily predicting the Big Ten wins the next 7 titles, but I do think we talked about earlier, like, I think the Big Ten has a chance to.
By the way,
beat up on each other.
The University of Florida has a larger endowment than the University of Michigan does. University of Florida has a $2.337 billion endowment, and Michigan's is $1.9 billion.
What's Ohio State's? What's their names? Oh,
hold on, a bajillion. I don't know. Hold on. Let's see. Notre Dame.
Oh, it may not. Well, the last I can find is 1.89.
Notre Dame's is 20.1 billion.
Yeah.
So Notre Dame's is 20 times, almost 20 times the size of Michigan's.
Yeah. Ohio State's, I've got it at 7.9. So, yeah, if my thought is that we may get into a money game where it is like the Ohio States and the Notre Dames and the Texas, like it is all just going to, I mean, we've talked about this. It's all just going to be money where it's like Ohio State, Notre Dame, Texas, Michigan. And
then Harvard, look out for Harvard because they have a bigger endowment than Notre Dame.
If they'll jump to the FBS, they can jump in at any point.
Don't mess with Harvard. But yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch. It's going to be, this game is constantly changing. And this is, I don't know, very interesting.
All right. That's all I got for today. I'm going to go get ready for the Super Bowl. Watch Taylor Swift.
I got to, watch Taylor Swift's boyfriend. I got my game day sweater on.
Just to let it, in case anybody forgets.
It's game day. All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed the Super Bowl, and whether you watched this live or you watched it later on, we appreciate your support. Please make sure that you are subscribed to A Peek Inside SEC Football. It's quick, it's easy, it's free, and it's the best way to support us. Have a good Sunday. Talk to you soon.